Welcome to episode 18 of the Formidable Genealogist Studio. And I am again talking to friend and colleague Marian Pierre-Louis. And we are talking more about houses, which is exciting because we were just discussing before I started recording that a lot of genealogists don't really delve into the house area. I personally haven't. I find the people and I move on. So I'm learning all kinds of new things. So Marian, let's talk about the process of researching homes. So, what are some of the common questions that people ask you when they are trying to get into understanding house histories and how to even go about it?
Okay, so when you're going beyond what the genealogists are doing of just finding their ancestors, I mean, it makes sense for genealogists because if the house doesn't exist or they don't know where the house is, which is a big problem, the genealogists are um, just wanting to find a deed in order to say, okay, my ancestor was here in this town in this place and time. And then they can pin that there and home ownership. So that shows stability and stuff like that. When people want to learn more about their houses, often they are asking two questions that kind of go hand in hand. One is, when was my house built? And two, how can I get a plaque or a marker for my house? And so those kind of go hand in hand. So let me talk about the marker program. So if you have an older house, and older is relative to the town that you live in. So if you live in a place in California, 1920s, you could have markers, or even 1950s. Um, Markers are typically done by some organization at the local level. And that could be a historical society, it could be a preservation organization, it could be a town office or body. So it really just depends on the town that you live in. Because even here in Massachusetts, where I live, there are all sorts of different organizations. It's not consistent from town to town. So in one town, it's the historical society. In another town, it's the actual town that's doing the program. So it really just depends. But what they're going to ask you is do some research, provide some research, and show us, some information about your house. And so that leads naturally into the question of, or if you know the when your house was built, they want to say, okay, well, show us some information that leads to prove that it's really that age. And so that's why people say, okay, well, I need to know when my house was built. Or it could be, I need to know when my house was built to see if I qualify for the marker program, that kind of thing. Some people are perhaps interested in like the Revolutionary War or something like that. And so they want to see if their house existed. That's for a very old house, that kind of thing. Um, so, so what I can do is take you a little bit through the process of what you would do to answer those questions.
Yes. Show everybody how to get started. That would be
Yes.
perfect.
So deed research is really critical in house history research. And the thing about deeds, though, is that deeds are looked at differently by house historians than by genealogists. So a genealogist is going to go in, they're going to look at their ancestor, and they're going to see when the house was purchased, and then they're going to go and they're going to try and find when the house was sold. Deeds for house historian, everything in the deed is really critical for a house historian. So, for instance, I mean, it does have the seller and the buyer, and we need to know that because when we want to do people research. But the land description is really critical because we're starting at the present, and in the present, maybe the land is a quarter acre or even a tenth of an acre or a half an acre. And as you go back in time, it could be an acre, it could be 5 acres, 10 acres, 20 acres, it could be a farm. So the land description is really critical for house historians, whereas genealogists typically don't care about it at all.
Right.
And so we want to look at the land description, and there are different components of the land description, the meets and the bounds. And so in New England, we have this thing where it could say, start at the oak tree, follow the stone wall, turn, and that's a real thing. And they actually carry those forward to often to the present time, even though they're meaningless and you can't find a property based on those descriptions at all. But there are other descriptions in the deed that are critical. So abutters are listed. So the people who live
Mhm.
next door, all around that property, and those names are so important because it helps you understand where your house is on the land. And when you start looking at old maps, and you have these land ownership maps like you find on Ancestry that list the owner's name or what you think is the owner's name, and then you can actually see the neighbors and you have a much better understanding of interpreting the deed when you can physically see the plot with the neighbors around them. So that aspect of the land description is really important. And then there's also the measurements in the land description. It could be square feet. It could be feet, if it depends. If they could be doing each border, saying, okay, 90 feet, 150 feet, whatever. Or it could be square feet, meaning the total area of the plot of land. Or it could be acres, again, being the total area of the plot of land. And it could also be rods and links, old style measurements. And the one thing I want to say about old style measurements is if you encounter those, all you need to do is go to Google and then do convert rods to feet or convert rods to square feet or convert rods to acres. It's so easy. And then you get the actual size of what the property was, and you want to make a note of that. And
Mhm.
the reason land descriptions are so important is that you want to um, take the size and track it so that when you get to a different size, then you know, okay, something has changed here and now the property is going to most likely get bigger. And
Mhm.
so that is really important to do with um, the deeds. Now, let's see what else is in there in the deeds. One of the things that genealogists don't think about with deeds, and they really, really need to, is that there are actually three dates on a deed. There's the deed that comes right before the signature. That's the transfer date. So that's when the seller and the buyer transfer with each other, and that's the actual transfer of the property. However, another date is the um, recording date. That's when the land is recorded at the Registry of Deeds or whatever the local office is that's doing that. And people today think that it's the same date typically, because now with electronic means, it gets transferred automatically pretty much the same day. But in the past, um, the transfer date and the recording date weren't necessarily the same. And it completely changes your interpretation of a property if the recording date is 6 months, a year, 5 years, or even 10 years or 50 years different. Farmers particularly did not record right away. The county seat could be far away and they just don't want to take the time to go there. So um, sometimes I found one farmer, and farmers are notorious for buying lots of plots of land and adding on to their property. And I had one farmer in Bristol County, Massachusetts, that bought many pieces of land over his life. And then towards the end of his life, when he wanted to sell, he took all of his deeds and he went and recorded them all at one time, even though the properties were all purchased at different times. And then he sold them right at that same time. So that's one of the things that people don't really think about with deeds. And then, of
Yeah.
course, there's the witnesses on a deed, and
Mhm.
and that is actually very important for a house history point of view. Uh, we have fans in genealogy, friends, associates, and neighbors, and that is so true. Those witnesses most likely are fans, and it's critical to figure out who those people are, and that will really help interpret the story by understanding
Yeah.
who those people are. Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to mention one other thing on the land deeds that I wish I would have known when I first started researching. Not only do you need to actually read the entirety of it, but you should be searching that same ancestor's name that first had the land far into the future. Like he may have been dead for 100 years, and
Mhm.
you will still find him listed as the original owner of the land or surveyed or first patented in X date. So I wish I would have realized that because you find a lot of clues too, where it might mention the other original neighbors. And perhaps the original doesn't exist online in a digitized form, and you can find it far in the future.
Yeah, those neighbors from a genealogy point of view are really critical because they could be the families that your family married into, or they're those fans as well. Yeah. Yeah, it's so fascinating actually. It's
Yeah.
just it's all in the detail. I mean, even in genealogy, you should be reading everything and or interpreting everything, but it's exactly the same with house history research. Yeah.
Right. So we talked about the land deeds, how
Mhm.
important those are to read. What are some other records that you use in your research? And as many as you want to mention, because people will be interested in following those leads.
Well, the next record I want to mention that's really important to house history research are tax records. And I know from watching Elizabeth Schoen Mills webinars that she uses tax records a lot. And she uses them. Southern tax records are a little bit different than northern tax records, and she's able to really place people in time and make theories and come up with relationships and stuff based on southern tax records. We can't do that quite so much in the north because we don't have as good a tax records, but we do have tax records. And what tax records do for a house historian is that they will help you understand when a house was built. Um, it can help you understand when things happen to a house. So, for instance, when you purchase a plot of land, say it's worth $1,000, and say you put a house on it. Now, the next year, with that house on it, it's going to be valued at $5,000 back in the day. But it's the looking at the tax records over time, not one tax record, multiple years. And that's when you can see things happening too. So you can see 1,000, 1,000, 1,000, 5,000. And then you're like, that's when the house was built. Now, if there's a fire, a lot of people ask about fires or other things that happen to houses, and tax records will also answer that question. So when you're cruising along, the value is a certain range, and then all of a sudden the value decreases. Well, you know that that's when that traumatic event happened to the house or the land. It could even be with like outbuildings. Maybe there was a barn or something on the property and now there isn't, and that kind of thing. So tax records can be very valuable for understanding how the land and the house and the property changed, but they can be tricky to find. So here in Massachusetts, it's the assessor's office create the tax records, and it's really hard to get access to the original tax records. They're usually like in a basement or in a closet, something like that. Um, we have town reports here in New England that they don't really have in other parts of the country. And they used to create a section sometimes of the town reports that would list the tax information. So they might publish some of it in those, but it's not consistent. So some towns did it, some towns didn't. Some did it every year, some did it once every 5 years. So tax records are really important, but they're tricky. The only really way to get them is to like develop a relationship with the assessor or the historical society or something like that and hope that you can figure out how you can get your hands on it. If you're lucky, you're working in a town where the tax records were published in the annual
Right.
report. But otherwise, it's going to be a difficult road, and they're not often online, and that's the other
Right.
issue. Yeah.
And do you find that the existence of those records is ever listed on like the Family Search Wiki, even though they're not digitized? Or is that not really a great source most of the time and you would need to just go
Uh,
straight to
that's
your local
interesting.
offices?
I know when you look at like Ancestry's Red Book or the source, they will
Hmm.
talk about tax records. But I think that they're talking more about They should be saying who generate the tax records. So that's
Hmm.
half the problem, half the solution.
Hmm.
Um, but the only tax records that are really sort of digitized or on Family Search would be like the really old ones,
Yeah,
at least for the Northeast. The southern ones are on. And I have no idea about the West or the Midwest when it comes to tax records.
right. There's not a ton.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
but
don't find a lot out there.
there are other ways around um, finding out when that house was built, like newspapers, local newspapers. Those are really, really critical. You can find real estate ads um, that might list a house for sale or house for sale for the first time.
Hmm.
Or local papers. I found a local paper. There was a man who he had a farm in town. He retired. He built a smaller house, and then the newspaper said, "Oh, so and so is building this house, and he's going to move into it in the spring." So I knew pretty much exactly when the house was built based on that.
Hmm.
Actually, I did a house history recently where the the original owners were selling the husband had died and the wife was selling the property, and it gave kind of a summary saying, oh, this is a very good property. It was built 25 years ago by so and so for $6,000. So that was just like in the newspaper announcing the upcoming sale. So that was really interesting. So there are
Yeah.
other ways besides tax records to find out when a house was built, but tax records are really helpful if you can get them. Yeah.
Well, before we wrap up, I want to know what you can do if the owner does not live in the house. What are some other ways that you can continue your research?
Yeah, so
Yes.
normally what we would do is we take the owner's name from the deed research and then we would search those names in the census records. And from 1880 to 1950, we have street names on the census records. And so then if you go and you search and you don't find those names, you're like, what do I do? What's the problem? And there could be multiple problems, but one of the most common is that the owners don't live in the house, that there are renters in the house. And actually, with full text search, this is much easier now because now you can actually search by the street name if the street name was listed. So smaller towns, even though the field is there, they might not have the street name,
Hmm.
but bigger towns will. So that's one way that you can find out who is actually in the property. And then the other way is using city directories. And city directories are so great because they were done every year as opposed to every 10 years like a census.
Yeah.
And with renters, this is particularly critical because you can see when they're moving in and when they're moving out. And there could be maybe, different renters in between censuses. So city
Hmm.
directories are extremely helpful. And I'm wondering, with full text search, we may get to a point soon where we can search for street names in city directories. I haven't actually tried that yet,
Hmm.
but you
You can
can.
on Ancestry too.
Yeah, I've been
Yeah.
testing the ancestry recently because I've been putting street names into the census, with no person's name, just the street name and the town. And
Hmm.
it takes a little bit, if it's a big street, it takes a bit of work, but it's very helpful if you can't find the owners in the house. So
Hmm.
that, yeah, so there's different workarounds you can do like that. City directors are so great. Yep.
Yes, I love those. I'm going to write a whole research guide all about what you can learn from city directories. So,
Yeah. Oh, they're just
yeah,
amazing. I just love
they
them.
are. Awesome. Well, thank you for joining for this episode, and I appreciate all of your information on deeds because I feel like there's just an infinite amount of information you can learn from deeds, and that people need to really take their time and really understand what they're
Yeah.
reading.
There's a
So,
lot of really good information in deeds. Yeah.
yeah. All right. Thanks a lot.
Great.